So welcome. Really happy to see so many folks came again to the second session after today's session this morning. It was such a great session. If you're just joining us, put your name and the name of your school in the chat so we know who's together with us. I am Churchill. I am Possip's Director of Community and the moderator today. We have a huge panel. This is our biggest panel today. It's really exciting and an intimate crew of people online. So we're really excited to share this information with you all. It's packed full of tons of experiential information. You are here today for handling hard feedback, leaders sharing what's worked. And we want to open with a moment of gratitude. This is an intention for today, which is to serve all of our partners and educators in the audience with information that helps them feel inspired and successful and related and connected to other people who are doing similar work. Even in the last session, we were just talking about how high stakes this work is, and we're just so happy to support you in any way that we can and share the knowledge of the community. We've already kicked off today with a great keynote session. If you were there, you know how great that conversation was. We learned 6 principles that open schools. So 6 principles that help open mindsets of leaders so that schools can co-create with families and communities. We talked about how elements like open mindsets allow for potential change, knowing the community that we serve, and also opportunities for collective engagement and collective democracy. So there were some really wonderful messages that stood out in that session. One really big one is that listening and being open to feedback takes practice. That was a big theme of the conversation. And we also know, as I said, that the work we're doing is high stakes and that schools are sometimes the first examples of democracy that people are active and engaged with. So as we approach this conversation, we want to keep those things in mind, how hard the work we're doing is and the fact that it takes practice. And we also want to acknowledge that even when you're striving for those great principles of openness, sometimes it's still going to be hard and it's going to take practice, and you can create stronger open systems through that practice. Handling hard feedback is definitely a muscle that we have to flex to stay in a thriving democratic system that is allowing for change and co-creation. I have up on the screen here some things that make feedback hard though, and we'll go ahead and talk about those and acknowledge those. Sometimes what is hard, as we know, is characterized by the way that feedback is given, and sometimes it's by the way that feedback is received. So just calling out a few of these things, knowing that it's not an exhaustive list, of course. When it comes to feedback being given, it can be hard if feedback is given absent of a system for capturing it in an organized and non-urgent way. That part's really important. It can be hard if it's given emotionally or offensively and without kind of that care of how it will be received. It can be hard if it doesn't have a clear ask, or it can be hard if it's anonymous. That doesn't mean it's not valuable, but it can make it feel harder. And we know that 23% of family responses and almost 50% of staff responses are anonymous in Possip feedback. So just acknowledging that those things are hard and we navigate them together. And then feedback can seem hard if it's received absent of ownership or collaboration. If it just kind of goes into a black hole, people worry about that. It can be hard if it's received from a place of scarcity. That was something that we talked about earlier in the session. So if there's staffing shortages or leadership changes, that's definitely going to change the way feedback is received. It's a hard place to feel that there's scarcity. It can also be hard if it's received defensively or with assumptions that it's all bad. We know, in fact, that year to date, we have 40% more praise comments than feedback comments. So it's not all bad. And it can also be hard if it's received without the context of the community. So someone that isn't a part of the community or is new and enthusiastic, but still learning, which I know well. So that's just a little bit about acknowledging, getting on the same page about what makes feedback hard. We're going to kick off today with a story from Possip CEO and founder. So we'll spotlight Shawnee here in a second. And before doing so, just taking a look at the screen, you might just keep those visuals with you. That's some of how the Possip team shares great praise that's coming out on our team. But Shawnee's going to open up candidly about her experience collecting team feedback for the company she runs and has created, which is crazy, right? That's hard. Go ahead, Shawnee. I'll stop sharing.
Oh yeah, well, this is great. Oh, you can put it back up actually, Caitlin. Can you put it back up? That's helpful. So thanks so much for sharing. And part of why we wanted to start with this is because it's been a couple of years. We weren't, to be honest, we weren't big enough at first to use Possip. I mean, there were like 5 of us, and now we've grown and we have about 50 staff members, about 20 who are on a full-time team, and then about 30 who are on our reporting team. And so we go bi-weekly is our cadence. We schedule out bonus questions. And I think there are a couple of things that are really important that I just wanted to call out, because I know a lot of the questions we get from our customers are like, how do I best use this? And so we too grow and learn as we use it. But the first thing I want to name is that we don't bypass the praise. Like, we actually probably overinvest in the positive feedback. So we have a member of our team who goes in and she actually creates these shout out cards for team members. They're super. I mean, I don't think it takes it takes time and thoughtfulness, but I think it's time that is well spent. And so people get these in their Slack channel or their email. And part of why that's so important, and I know Dr. Swarr will talk about this later, is as educators, and I'm a former teacher myself, we often are so focused on what needs to be changed and what needs to be fixed. But in the spirit of handling hard feedback, part of what can prepare our brains and ourselves to handle hard feedback is to remember that people are sharing the feedback often in love, whether it's love for the institution or organization or love for their child or someone in their life. And so I think spending disproportionate time focusing on the positive, when there is positive, there's not always positive, I think is super important and has been really helpful for us. The second part that we did is at one point we kind of realized that we had 2 kind of different teams, and that our reporting team had very specific feedback, and then other members of our team had another. So we actually split our reports out into 2 kind of accounts. That was super helpful for us to make sure that the information was getting to the people who could most take action on it. The third thing is we have an ongoing cadence of outbound communication. So we have a team newsletter that goes out as often as monthly. And so that's where I share the high level observations or what I'm hearing, so that everyone knows what they're hearing. And Naja Callender from Houston ISD talked about this really important way that they think about their feedback loop in the earlier session. And so similarly, we kind of make sure that everyone knows, like, what's our overall happiness rate within Possip, and then, what are the trends that we're hearing? And then on the individual comments, those are sometimes hard for Caitlin, just the very reasons that you named. Sometimes they do come in anonymous. Sometimes there is context that I think whoever's sharing it might have. Sometimes I'm emotionally in a place where I'm feeling strapped and like, I can't do anything about all of this. So I try to connect to my higher order self and still just follow up to let people know that I've heard them. I'm not perfect. I even, as I talk about it, I'm thinking about one feedback that I meant to follow up on, and I had to check in with someone else before I followed up on. So I haven't kind of closed that loop, but that's the idea and the ideal. And so that's what I aim to do. So those are kind of just a few ways that we think about it. And we do try to use the bonus question frequently, and also both kind of forward looking. So some of the ways we've used it is, what type of training do you want? Or, after we have a training, do you have any follow-up comments or questions? What are some things that you're coming out of this with, as well as just ideas for our product, ideas around where people kind of gather their learning from, and then ongoing kind of more, I would say kind of more genuine feedback. So those are a bit of the ways that we think about it at Team Possip.
I just have one question for you, Shawnee, and then we'll move on. And so my question is, it's a hard question. How has hard feedback helped shape the team culture?
Yeah, it is a really good question. And I would say one of the things, and we talked about this again in the earlier session, but trust is so foundational. And I say that to say that even before Possip, I'm glad and thankful that people would reach out to me and share feedback if they had it, but not always. I mean, I think probably more selectively. And so that a couple of things about the hard feedback. I think one is, I think when I see the hard feedback, it helps me remember that people are being vulnerable also when they're sharing. And so that just creates a reminder for me, and also an appreciation for me that when people are sharing hard feedback, it is them also being vulnerable. And so keeping that in mind. The other thing is it helps kind of decentralize things from just being about me as a founder. Sometimes in particular, I think there can be that tension, and also let people assume I know everything. If something's happening, it's because I mean for it to be happening. And so I have huge blind spots. And so sometimes people can share feedback and I can either say like, oh, I had no idea that was happening, or I had no idea people thought that was by intention. And so it's really helped shape the culture where it can hopefully be a more shared ownership of the organizational culture and the organization itself, as opposed to just about me. And it also helped me realize where I have blind spots, or where people maybe are not telling me things that they might be thinking about. And it's an ongoing process. Again, I think that's, the main thing. And again, we talked about this earlier in the morning session, the ability to keep iterating and keep learning, and then not never feeling done is, I think, an important part of it as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Shawnee. As somebody who has given hard feedback and received hard feedback, and Shawnee and I know each other well. And so we've been in that real life loop and in the Possip world together in that way. And I think trust really makes a difference, because receiving and giving feedback is a totally different experience when it comes from a place of trust. And it can really propel you to a positive place much more quickly. But also, I just have personally as an employee appreciated that there is a place for feedback. And it feels safe and it feels appropriate, and it helps it be less of an emotional experience for myself. So thank you so much, Shawnee, for helping us kind of just ground ourselves in the fact that we're all going through this.
Yeah, one other thing I'll say, and I've shared this with the team too, I will sometimes share feedback with Possip, and really the feedback is sometimes to myself, but part of by me doing that, it helps remind myself that just because someone is sharing feedback, like if I'm not happy, I'm not happy. Like it's okay, even if I run the company, sometimes things are happening that are a lot even for me. So that helps free me back up. Also, when other people are sharing that, to remember it's not always about me. Like I myself can be having tough times and share hard feedback. And so I think that's an important part of the process too, just to remind ourselves that sometimes we're not happy, even if we have the ability to like kind of lead teams or organizations as well.
Totally. That's really awesome, Shawnee. Thank you so much. And Shawnee's experience models for us some tactics for handling hard feedback. Again, not exhaustive. And even in Shawnee's voice right now, you heard some other tactics, but a few that we just wanted to call out that kind of are the theme of the day. Reiterating a mindset of openness and receptivity, checking your own assumptions. If you have an emotional reaction to feedback, what's that about? What's that about for your team? And staying open and receptive. Also having a protocol for reviewing and talking about feedback. We have Dr. Kerry Swarr here today, who's going to talk to us about a protocol specifically for reviewing and talking about feedback. Having that system, and as we talked about, right, that safe place, that place that's non-urgent, that feels appropriate. We know what it's like when we have a space for our feelings and our needs to go. And that is a comforting thing. And then focusing on what you're learning, not just what's being said, which is really difficult. And as something that Dr. Swarr said that really stuck with me, persevering through the discomfort. It's really important to be able to sit with that discomfort. Even in the last session, Shawnee was saying, sometimes you don't have something to do with the feedback. It's just there to sit with and to know. So persevering through that discomfort. I'll add a couple tactics from this morning session. Keep practicing, remind yourself and your team that it takes practice, and then having a shared language with families and staff, whatever that means to you, a language that is translatable, that is easy for people to understand, and phrases and words that people resonate with given your community. So we're going to go into a protocol for reviewing feedback, one of those tactics. That's what we're going to drill into next before we get to the panel. Having a protocol for reviewing and talking about feedback can really be a huge aid to your team, but also help you find the true value in the feedback that's coming to you routinely. So Kerry, Dr. Kerry Whitacre Swarr is many, many things. She's a Possip reporter and supporter. She helps in consulting our partners and has recently just worked with Howard University Middle School on implementing this protocol. We have a great blog on that. She is an equity consultant and just finished her dissertation and became Dr. Swarr. Last week, we got to watch that presentation. And that was about this protocol specifically. So Kerry, I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and then if you would so kindly walk us through your protocol. Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
What inspired you to create this protocol?
I definitely have known Shawnee for a while and really loved the work of Possip. And really, I highly value the work of family engagement in schools and see it as really vitally important, and see that Possip's texting tool between families and schools is so important to give to connect families to schools and hopefully help schools improve. But I saw some opportunities in Possip's work to create a protocol and to also bring families to the table to review the Possip family feedback reports together. So that was the gist of my research, and then ended up creating this protocol that is modeled after a lot of education protocols out there, but got to practice it with a new Possip client who's just started Possip this fall, Howard University Middle School. So, and I was embedded, and this work was embedded they were relaunching a school improvement team. So it was within that work, which made a lot of sense to me, that this team that exists in many, many schools, really with the purpose of improving schools, what better way than to ground that work of a team like that with Possip feedback reports from families, and really digest it, understand it, like you said, within the context of the school community. So that was the gist of it.
Nice. And before we get into those 3 steps, which we'll do next, one more question for you. When we did the session with Howard University Middle School, it was really huge to hear Principal Corbett, talk about how vulnerable they had to be, how it was scary. And so I am just curious, that was my takeaway. One of the big things. I'm curious if I were to pose a question to you, which is just from that experience with Howard Middle School, what was like your big aha or your big takeaway? What are one of them?
One of them is just the power of having families at the table reviewing the family feedback is really powerful to do that. And I don't think that's often done. Usually it is school-based people, administrators, maybe a few teachers who are looking at these reports and, making some assumptions about what families meant. But when you have families also at the table confirming, yes, parents need much more support on how to use a technical, a technology platform that you might be using, like you have someone at the table sort of validating the feedback that's coming in and explaining it if it needs to be, but also holding the school much more accountable for that feedback. Like I have quotes from some of the parents that participated to be like, now that a parent is at the table, like, what are you going to do? You need to do something based, because of the feedback we're seeing here. It is not something that you could, just put to the side and, not pay attention to it. Having families at the table is what's going to make sure that something happens as a result.
Does that need to happen every time, Kerry? Say that people are getting their reports every 2 weeks.
I did it. I did 3 sessions with them after a training. And so we did, the school got reports every 2 weeks. So each meeting we were able to review 2 reports at the same time. And so that in an hour, and we'll get into the protocol a little bit too. And that was a lot of detail actually to review with parents. So I think everybody found it very valuable. When I interviewed folks later, 100% of folks who participated wanted to continue the practice and really saw that it had the potential for really transforming what was going on at their school.
Okay. And then last question, I keep saying it's my last one, is, so one of our panelists, Laura, is here from Mesquite ISD, and they use Possip for staff. So I'm just curious, as we go through these next 3 steps for your protocol, do you feel this is really firmly about reviewing feedback from families, or do you think these are translatable ideas for when you're reviewing feedback about staff?
I think it's translatable because I know Possip uses it for staff and students. And I think it's very translatable to have this process to really get rid of some of the emotion, as you've pointed out in your earlier slides, that feedback can then create, and having a protocol and a process to review and really look for evidence in the feedback, and then have a conversation about things you're wondering that you aren't sure about, and then potentially designing a bonus question to get at the things you're wondering about and don't quite know yet. It's definitely translatable to your staff, Possip, pulse checks, and students too.
Awesome. Okay, Kerry, let's get to it. Let's talk about these 3 steps.
Sure. And very simple. And yeah, and I think a lot of folks who are on the call are probably immersed in education and in schools, and this very simple protocol will seem, I think, familiar to you, but it's really 3 steps. And we did this both virtually and in person and in just an hour. So it is rather simple and very versatile. So the first step is really, what do we know? So looking at the Possip family feedback report, what are we noticing in the feedback? And so there is sort of a script, and I saw, I think it's been linked to the protocol, but looking at the feedback, why should we care? How can we better understand the impact of what we've noticed? Is most of the feedback compliant? And what does that mean for building an equitable school? So there's some prompt questions for folks to really.
What does compliant mean? Sorry.
So that they're just sort of getting the Possip text and being like, just like thanks or yes or no, right? As a reporter, I see a lot of parents just saying yes or no to your questions, instead of like being very specific about, what about that car line that they are very unhappy with, and very specific, maybe even about some ideas to fix that, right? So the compliant would be the yes, no, and not sharing really real feedback, right? And one of the other things to notice here, and I had another tool to look at too, is like, what are families saying and what are they prioritizing at your school? And so I think that's very valuable, particularly when you're doing this work as part of school improvement, and a lot of the family engagement work really talks about, really focused on what families are prioritizing at your school. So this can really help you identify that and discuss that.
What I love about step 1 too, Kerry, in the blog and the protocol we'll share with everyone, by the way, is you talk about this noticing being done quietly and individually. Mm-hmm. So even suggesting that folks write on your report reading team, write down 3 or 4 notice statements. And I think that, just starting with that statement, I noticed that, and knowing that, being quiet and able to write this down helps it become a fully formed thought that's free of interference, judgment, speculation. So that's really interesting. Do you want to talk a little bit more about why you suggest that happen independently?
Sure. For 2 things, because people are different and some people are individual processors, right? And really is to address people who maybe dominate the conversation, right? And are able to think quickly and make, comments. So we slow it down on purpose a little bit, and make the folks really take a step back and think on their own first. So that does, I think, lead to a lot of different ideas. And then you'll quickly find out, actually, what I noticed is not what this teacher noticed or this parent noticed. So immediately you're going to see, wow, everybody has some different perspectives about what they're seeing, what they're noticing here in the feedback report. And that gets uncovered pretty quickly.
Okay, amazing. So we'll move on to step 2. Step 1, just to summarize, everyone writes down their noticing statements, and then person by person, you're able to share them so that you can see what people are noticing independently and what emerges collectively from those noticing statements. Step 2 is about wondering. Can you tell us more about step 2, Kerry?
Sure. Yeah. So as we know, like this feedback you're getting is through text. So it is by design, limited. So some may be very specific and we're very clear about what about the car line they don't like, but other statements may be like, I don't like the technology platform, but we don't know what about it, right? So that may lead to some wondering, like, well, I wonder what about it. I wonder what families need to feel more comfortable with that learning platform. So this is the space to sort of take the feedback that is written on the page and collectively try to make sense of what you're seeing there. So so that is important next step.
And I love this step. It's kind of handled the same way, right, Kerry? Like these wondering statements. I love this step because so often, sometimes we'll hear people feel panicky or worried that they don't know what to do with a comment. And so wondering kind of allows you to sit back and to see like what can be learned from this besides just an immediate solution, especially if you feel that an immediate solution isn't available or contradicts other work that you're doing. So the wondering kind of opens you up to a broader sense of learning, I think, which is curiosity. So step 3, Kerry, can you tell us a little bit about step 3, which I guess we've deemed dialogue.
Yes. So really then it's taking the noticing and the wondering and then really move towards like, what are we going to do about it? So the now what part, but also what are the other questions that we have that we can then explore, whether it's through the bonus question. Is a lot. I knew a lot of schools weren't using it. And I wondered, what if we had a group that reviews this feedback and wonders together and makes sense together and designs bonus questions together. So we did that process a couple different times. And, and then the next meeting looked at the responses to the bonus questions too, and really kept track of that as part of this protocol in the process. So that worked very well. And the school community got a lot of information that they wouldn't have gotten if they hadn't made sense of this work together to explore some of the issues. So like, parents seemed to want extracurriculars, but it wasn't clear at all, what they wanted. So, bonus question was around that. Another was, the school and many schools now do a lot of different things around family communication, but they weren't sure like what does our families this year like, what is the way they want to be communicated with the most. So that was another one to explore and then further improve the family engagement and communication work that they were already doing. So those are just some examples. But this was really important. And I did get some feedback, though we did, really do this all in an hour. Like folks said, this is very valuable. And so if they did have more time, they would take more time here to really have those deeper conversations with folks who have different perspectives around the table. So folks thought this was extremely valuable. You can get it done quickly, but if you have more time to spend more time here, this is worth the sense making together. So
yes, and Howard University Middle School, Catherine and Corbett, they definitely voiced that they wanted more time, that they loved it. I think what's cool, thank you so much, Kerry. And I think what's cool about Kerry's work, or what's to be noticed, is that really there's a lot of a meeting decorum. It's a process, but there's definitely a decorum. And so when you read the blog, and we'll share more after the session, you can see that it is about taking turns, allowing people to speak fully before moving on to the next. And so I think that decorum, stepping up, stepping back, having standards that you go over at the top of the meeting with your report reading team is really helpful for the efficiency of using that hour wisely. So thank you so much, Kerry. And we're really excited to take this to our panel. And our panel will include Kerry and Shawnee and principals and educators. So we've got a big group with us. And so I'll just introduce our wonderful panel before we spotlight them and get into a conversation. So a big welcome to Laura Jobe, who is our Chief of Communications from Mesquite ISD, which is in Texas, my home state, Shawnee's home state. We have Jessica Lawrence, our Family Engagement Manager at Baltimore City Schools, has been our partner for 2 years now. Kayla Miller, also a longstanding partner, a principal at KIPP Nashville. And then we've also got Tristan Fields, a principal at KIPP NYC. Taylor Porter, you see Taylor's image here, may join us, but as many of these panelists are principals, they often get pulled into school situations. And so we will just wish Taylor well, and hopefully Taylor's able to join. So I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to dig into our conversation with our panelists. We'll begin spotlighting them so you can see all of their lovely faces. Awesome. And then I'm going to start with a question that I want to take this over to Laura. So Laura, as a leader, whether you're thinking about the way you're handling family feedback or staff feedback, which is what you guys are specializing in at Mesquite, what do you tell yourself to prepare for hard feedback? Because staff feedback is hard. So that is why I started with you. Staff feedback is the hardest, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Well, I am a naturally curious person. As a communicator, I want to know what people think. I want to know if our messages are getting through. And so for me, it's always, I get a little bit excited when we get our Possip report, because even though I know it's going to contain some negative feedback, I mean, people tend to say when they're not happy, but it's an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity, because then we can fix it. If we know what the problem is or know what people are feeling, we can address it. And so to me, that is always the opportunity that's there to make something better.
Let's take that same question to someone else. Kayla, how do you prepare yourself for navigating hard feedback?
Great question. I think one mindset that I try to keep for myself and for my team is that feedback is a gift, and that it's not personal. It is something to make us better. And so when reading it, trying to read it from another person's perspective, and know that they're telling their own story. And before even, jumping into action, make sure you're investigating, understanding. I heard something about wondering, like ask all of the wondering questions to really kind of dig in and understand, is this one person's problem or is it 10 people's problem, to make it a much larger issue than it has to be, unless it is that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We'll take the same question to one more person and then we'll move on. Tristan, would love to ask you the same question. How do you prepare yourself and your team, actually, if you'd like to broaden it, for navigating hard feedback?
Well, I think that the only times I've ever truly grown is when I've received hard feedback, right? So that is really the ways that I prepare myself and the way that I prepare my team. And I believe my team also has a very similar mindset around the feedback that creates the most change is the feedback that is the hardest to hear and to give. And that's why it's important to create space for it.
So what we're hearing from a lot of you is a mindset, right? It's a productive mindset, which is a lot of what we talked about in this first conversation this morning for the retreat, this open mindset. In terms of how you, Tristan, thank you for talking about, kind of the mindset you create with your team. I would be curious if there's any other like tactics or conversations that you all have had to have with your teams in order to keep them open. So just, that's a question maybe I'll just leave open. I know Shawnee's had to have those kinds of conversations with her team. Jessica.
I was going to put Jess on the spot, because I know that's something that you think a lot about.
Oh, you're still on mute.
No, I'm here. Thank you. So, one of the things that has really guided our approach to being responsive to the needs of families during our education recovery efforts has really just been leaning into the fact that our families can help us solve problems. They have the answers. We don't have all of the answers. They can help us. They have assets. They have ideas that we need to tap into. And so when I start there, navigating the hard and challenging feedback about something that we could have done better, or if we dropped the ball on something and owning it, always leading with that approach, it gives me hope and it keeps it positive, right? And then the other thing that I'll add is, we get into this and we have all of these compliance. I appreciate you all mentioning earlier the compliance piece. So much of our requirements from listening and learning from families to inform school improvement plans and budgets and what we do next is driven by mandates, right? And it's coming from everywhere. And so I think making sure that everyone, not just, parents, but staff, partners are on the same page around the purpose and intent of the feedback. You're willing to say, okay, we learned this is what's on the table. this is what we can do with it. This is what we can't do. Here's how we need you to help. So again, just to recap, being open to it, understanding that whoever you're getting feedback from, whoever you're asking the questions of, they can help, you can learn from it, and keeping that center in all that you do.
I love that you specifically mentioned like owning it, because that was one of our tactics. We talked about, it's hard to, feedback can be hard to land if you don't have an owner. So having an owner, having that owner be known. I would be curious of the tactics we kind of talked about, and you can expand beyond them if there's any that really stood out to you. Laura, can I pose this question to you first? Is there a tactic that Shawnee shared or that Kerry shared that really resonated?
I really liked the idea of sitting down together and hearing disparate perspectives. I think sometimes we assume everybody sees things the way that we do. Well, that's obvious. They don't like this or whatever, but sometimes you can get a really insightful look from someone else, and you might miss something if so that is intriguing to me, and something that I will tell you, in our Possip reviews, those are typically done independently. And so this has kind of inspired me to say, maybe we need to do that together and walk through it together and see if we all come up with the same things. So
that's awesome. That's that practicing. You're just like learning and thinking, let's see about this other way. That's super cool, Laura. Tristan, was there a particular tactic, and you can have one of your own, but of the things that we talked about, was there a tactic that really resonated or one that inspired you to think of another way?
I think the giving moment and time to the positive praise and the affirming praise is really important, because it often gets discounted, and it is what prepares people psychologically to be able to put the affirming or the adjusting feedback in context. And similar to the folks on this call, I and many of my staff are very much trained to solve problems, though we know that like living in that space is not one that gives us a lot of joy, because we are frustrated with not being able to solve the problem. So I think really holding that space and celebrating the wins and forcing people to celebrate their wins, it prepares people to give them the confidence that they can solve the problem, no matter how big or difficult it may arise.
That's really smartly put. Kayla, I saw you shaking your head. Actually, I see Jess shaking her head too. So Kayla, is there something about what Tristan said or another tactic that really resonated with you?
Yeah, I think the part around like you just don't find joy in constantly solving problems. It resonated for sure. Boots on the ground, just trying to make it all come together. There's always a problem to solve in schools, for sure, at every minute of the day. And so I think trying to find the joy within that is very hard for sure. So that definitely resonates. I think one thing that I try to do is, in order to maybe find the problem earlier before it gets too deep, is just to be present, and to really be out on the hallways with students, with teachers, on the ground with them, and so that you can, maybe find the problem before it becomes big, or maybe before it even becomes one. And I think one thing that I wonder is, how do we do that with families as well? How do I walk alongside them to kind of understand problems earlier?
I have a comment. Sorry, Kayla, I've also heard that you actually have like a system of sorts that you go through. Can you share that a little bit?
Yeah, like in terms of responding to Possip.
I think so, staff feedback in particular.
Yes,
is that right?
yes. Yeah. Possip is a big deal at KIPP Academy Nashville. We celebrate hitting 90% or higher in response rates. It could be something small like donuts. It doesn't take a lot. Gene Day, something. But we really celebrate feedback, and like I said before, like really take feedback as a gift to us. And so after I receive our reports on Tuesdays from staff, I kind of dig into them, figure out like what's our percentages. I do, in framing this summer, like name for them, if you put no, you're not happy, or maybe, or like almost happy, please put a comment, like it's required, so that I can understand why. And so there are lots of comments. And so I try to read through them. If they want an individual follow-up, I require them to put their name as well. And so part of my work on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is following up with folks that have put Possip comments in that really want to be heard. And so it's an opportunity for me to sit down and really understand, is this a problem? Is it feedback for this current year? Is it something that I can fix? But more than anything, like, I want to make sure people feel heard and that their voice means a lot to us.
That's really helpful, Kayla. I have a question that I'm going to take next to Jess and then Laura, because I've seen you all respond to hard situations like this. So one of the things we talked about this morning in our opening session was this idea of like abundance mindsets. And that's a hard concept for me to understand unless I think about scarcity mindsets. And so the question I'd love to ask you two and anyone else who wants to chime in, how do you handle feedback that you know is coming from a place or a mindset of scarcity?
Well, I want to go back to something that Shawnee mentioned earlier, and tactics for handling hard feedback. Focus on what you are learning and not just what is being said. And that's tough. One of the ways that our district has used Possip, which has been a game changer for our approach to school-wide planning and district-wide planning, is we use the tool to get quick feedback on policy changes. So like our academic calendar and things that are really like, how many days should we have for PD and, early dismissals, things that are really hot topics and touch points for any family. I mean, as a parent, for me, having to navigate the calendar and what days are we going to do what. And when we get into those comments and when people start to, see and we want this date and less of this, it can really be challenging, because as district leaders, we want the best for young people. We want our educators to have the best professional development opportunities. And we want that calendar to really reflect where we're going. And when we hear from families and it doesn't line up, it can be a challenge. And so I lean on what you shared, Shawnee. One of the things that you have to do is listen to what families are calling out that they need and try to meet somewhere in the middle. So back to your point about the mindset, it really is looking at it from a place of, this is information that we need. I love what you said, Kayla, about feedback being a gift. So, I mean, if you approach it in that way, you can find the middle ground and meet the needs of all stakeholders. So that's my take.
That's great, Jess. I love that. And I think it really resonates in lots of ways, but including the scarcity mindset, when people don't feel like there's enough to go around. So just Yeah.
On that scarcity mindset, I think something we wrestle with at Possip, and there's not necessarily a right answer, but I'll just name it as something that's hard, is time is I think in education, the most scarce resource is time. And so people are very worried about time. And something that happens, again, that we don't really know what to do with, is a lot of people work to protect other people's time. And so they might say, well, we don't want to share this with so-and-so because they don't have time to deal with it or handle it. And so I think what unintentionally can happen is we don't give people the opportunity to, and we even talk about this with Possip, where it's like, are you saying, like, have you given that person the opportunity to say, I can't do that? Or are you just assuming? And so it's just a tough, tricky. I'll share a quick testimonial. I reached out to someone, we're going on spring break, so I reached out to someone who usually dog sits. And I was like so hesitant to reach out to her because she had just started a new job. But I finally reached out to her and she said, you know what, this is such a blessing to me, because actually my job's not going to start paying me for another month. And so I needed some extra income. And so I was like, that is such a good example of me trying to like make decisions on her behalf without even asking her if she could do something. And so it's just a tension, I think, in the scarcity mindset that of time, and how do we think about that differently?
Yeah, I love that. And your story is a very empathetic one, because you were worried about someone else's scarcity, but sometimes people approach comments and leave comments where they really feel they're lacking something that they're either owed or that they need. And so, Laura, I would be really curious. I know that you all have responded to Possip feedback with some real changes for your staff. So I would be curious, how did you all handle comments and hard feedback coming from scarcity mindsets? How'd you approach it? And if you want to tell a story, we'd love to hear your story.
Well, this is perfect timing this week because, well, for the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about calendar. We were actually looking at a 4-day school week that we kind of abandoned at the last minute. And there has been a lot of frustration over that because that was very much favored by our staff and a lot of our parents. And so we've been hearing a lot of negative feedback, but something we really, really focus on is the why. And I think it's really important to explain as many times as you can, as many different ways, why you make decisions you do, because they may disagree with the decision, but they can't really disagree with the why. And we made that decision because we were doing what was best for kids. And I don't know how you argue with that. That's our job. And so we've really tried to, and even some of the calendar things that we put out in terms of what we are going to do next year, we've got to spend a lot of time explaining why we're doing that, why we're adding more breaks in, why we can't get out, or why we start so early in August, why, all those things that people, once they know, I think it helps that scarcity mindset. And they still, again, they may not like it, it may not work for them, but they understand why we're doing it. So, but I just want to mention too, one of the things that we did, I'll let someone else talk. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. I love the story. I know which story you might tell, but it's okay. So moving on to another question, and we're really leaning into what makes things hard. So just know that, and Shawnee mentioned time. Sometimes there's a feeling of people being overburdened by feedback. And so I want to take this one to Tristan and ask you, Tristan, as a principal, how do you handle if your team is feeling overwhelmed or overburdened, and feedback is still coming in?
I think that normally comes down to, I forgot the name of the matrix, but we use a lot of the important versus urgent matrix. So you have the things that are important and are urgent, those got to get done first. You have the things that are, important but not urgent, and those are the things we can delegate and schedule and whatnot. We have the stuff that is also not important and not urgent, right? So we shouldn't even be touching those things, right? So I think in terms of dealing with in moments of feeling overwhelmed, it's thinking in terms of that matrix, the importance versus urgency, as well as thinking about locus of control. I think that what's nice about the Possip data, in which the way that it comes out is, it's something that I can shift and pivot and direct, so that not all the time does everybody have to look at all of the feedback, but I'm able to put people in motion and just copy and email a piece of feedback and send it to my dean of students or send it to my director of student support services and just put them in motion. So I'm more of an air traffic controller in times where things may be overwhelming. So I think that number one, it's using the matrix, which I think is the Eisenhower matrix, looking at the chat. Thank you for that. And the second is in moments of where there's a time crunch, as the leader, you can play the air traffic controller and just bite size and chunk the feedback in a way that staff still feels like they are getting the feedback and working to respond to the needs of parents or students or staff members, but they're not necessarily being overwhelmed by all of the feedback that is there.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think it's also, the Possip reports help by putting things in categories of hot, medium, cool. So we do kind of like that first go at it for teams. But I think it's really helpful, Tristan, even I don't know necessarily how we do this, but when families or staff people sharing feedback understand, you know, some of that matrix, that sometimes there are urgent needs, sometimes there are some that are less urgent. I know when I leave feedback in Possip as a participant, I try to think about that personally. Is there any comment on that? Is that something we can translate to the people that leave feedback?
I wanted to say something about
Yeah.
a way my superintendent has approached that. He actually, and I know that you condense all the feedback into the kind of these summaries and things like that, but he actually reads every comment that comes in personally. And he makes tick marks and he tallies and he determines what are the top 5 issues. And then he makes a video and he says, this is what the Possip told us this time. And he said, if your comment didn't make the top 5, you can understand why I don't have time to deal with that right now. I'm dealing with these other things that are bigger deals to more people. And he specifically addresses how he's going to tackle each one of those. And so that has been really good because I think some people have been like, oh, they don't even read these, nothing, you know, but he'll say, this is what we're going to do. And then they see it done. And so I think that's a really good way to close that loop with your people.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. Oh, sorry. The other thing we've seen is sometimes we've had school boards who've used Possip. I love that though. Like, here's kind of the transparency of sharing it back and like, you got these, but these are the top 5 and what you shared wasn't. But we had a school board who was using it for a specific question, and the school board member admittedly said, like, hey, I think everyone thinks this. So they had a thought on, I think it was school closings. They had a very strong opinion. When they did the Possip survey, they realized that the school board member was partially right. Everyone in the district he served thought that way. So like it kind of showed like 90% of people in one part of the district thought one way, 90% of families in another part of the district thought another way. And so what it looked like on paper was like half people thought yes, half people thought no, but then actually it was very different based on what part of the town they were in. And so I think to that point too is also the transparency of like, it might feel like everyone in your world thinks that, and that may be true, but we're a district of, you know, however many tens of thousands, and other people aren't sharing that. And so I think that's so powerful, the story of how kind of being really transparent and open can help.
Definitely. We're going to close out with a whip around question for everyone. Same question, which is just what is your takeaway from today? Is there anything you're going to keep close? Anything you're going to take with you from today's conversation? Let's start with Jess.
Wow. Thank you everyone for sharing your insight. I think my key takeaway from today is to recognize that feedback can be hard, but it is definitely needed in the work that we're doing. I also want to call out that evaluating and assessing your work should be collaborative. If all stakeholders should be at the table, whether it's youth, staff, your communications team, everybody should be able to weigh in and know it and understand it to inform what they do day to day on behalf of young people. So just glad to hear what everybody's doing and how you're supporting the work to educate our students.
Thank you, Jess. Kerry, I know you were on this panel. I didn't call your name anytime just now. So now you're on the spot. What's your big aha for today? The thing you're taking home?
Well, always it's like what you learn as a group, right? That's what is the big aha to me. And so I've learned things today just listening to you all. And when you do a group too, and with the protocol, like you could add, different training is in to really support your group with whatever they want to learn. So it could be Tristan's important and urgent matrix, like might be really important to add to a school that is struggling with everything seems important to do. How should we tackle this? So that one sounds like a really good, easy thing to try. The other one is that I love what Laura talked about, sort of the next steps of the communication back to the community, right? And the leaders sort of saying, this is what we heard, this is what we're doing, and how important that is after the protocol, I think, to then take it back and close the loop on it and make the improvements and then watch that, hopefully that school transform, and that's the whole purpose. So.
Thank you, Dr. Swarr. And Kayla, what's your takeaway for today?
Yeah, I'm going to take away an idea from Tristan around just not being the owner of all feedback and distributing that to other leaders. I think I've constantly, taken it on as my project, but really ensuring that I utilize some of the system opportunities that Possip does have to offer to kind of share the feedback with others and model for them what those conversations could look like, but also charge them with being the leader of the problem versus myself. So
more of that collaborative model. Yeah. Like Jess also spoke of. Tristan, since your name got mentioned next, we'll go to you next.
I think the thing that I'm thinking about in regards to the feedback is really how we respond to it. And, just thinking about the ways that what are the things that people are doing to make sure that the feedback keeps coming? Because I've been a part of a lot of situations where people have initially been given a lot of feedback and then it stops because they're not seeing the follow through on that. So that's the thing that I'm taking away. I'm reaffirmed that feedback in and of itself is very valuable, but it's really about how well we respond to it in order to make sure that the feedback that we get is accurate and it is enough to make sure that we keep growing. So I'm thinking about responses to the feedback.
Amazing. Thank you. And then Laura, will you close us out?
Sure. I'm just reminded of just how important it is to what we do. Feedback is a gift. It is something that's an opportunity. And I think that if we stop asking for feedback, that's when we get into trouble. And I really feel like just that whole collaborative idea of discussing this together and seeing how we can move forward together is the best way to do it.
Amazing. Yes, I heard the themes of staying open, staying collaborative, and also making sure you're sharing out what's happening. So thank you so much to our panel. I'm just going to close up our session for the day. This was a really great conversation, and we so appreciate all of you being here. I know how busy your schedules are. In the recap for this conversation, we will be sharing Kerry's protocol. We'll also be sharing a blog on that protocol and featuring all of these panelists more on our blog. So you'll see more of them. And speaking of seeing more of each other, we wanted to just give a little shout out to something new that Possip is launching soon. We're excited to announce a Possip membership. This is for our educators in our community. It's over 5,000 people that we are connected to as Possip people and 1,500 schools. So we are offering educators a new membership, and we're going to hold space for talent, wisdom, and potential collaboration. We'll have a job board and opportunities so that the Possip network can employ each other. We'll have a membership directory so people can get connected and curated content that is just for members. So stay tuned for more information on that. And we're very excited to share it with you. We have 2 more sessions today. So join us soon. In about 15 minutes, we kick off with talking about sharing data and insights. And then we close out today around communication strategies.